U.S. authorities analyzing the before and after satellite images of Iran. Of course, the question, how much damage was done? And the new questions, did Iran move enriched uranium before the U.S. attack?
In the pre-dawn hours, Iran awoke to the aftermath of a coordinated assault on its most sensitive nuclear infrastructure. Key underground sites, Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan, were struck by US air power, with satellite images capturing collapsed bunkers at Natanz and extensive damage at the other facilities. The scale of destruction was immediately clear, signaling a major setback for Iran's nuclear ambitions. How did American stealth bombers bypass one of the world's most robust air defense networks to deliver such a decisive blow? Here's how it happened. On the night of the operation, US B-2 Spirit bombers crossed into Iranian airspace under the cover of darkness, executing a coordinated strike against the country's most fortified nuclear sites. These bombers, developed for stealth and long-range missions, are uniquely capable of avoiding detection by even the most advanced radar systems. Taking off from Missouri, the aircraft initially appeared bound for Guam, a calculated deception, before altering course and flying east over Iraq and Syria to approach their targets undetected. Iran's air defense network, built around Russian-made S-300 systems and a dense array of surface-to-air missile batteries, was designed to repel precisely this kind of incursion. Yet the B-2s penetrated these defenses with apparent ease. For years, Iran's leadership had portrayed its nuclear sites as impregnable, shielded by thick concrete and buried deep beneath the earth. In a matter of hours, those claims were tested and found wanting. The primary targets that night were the Fordow and Natanz nuclear facilities. Fordow, carved into a mountainside and ringed by anti-aircraft positions, had long been a symbol of Iran's determination to protect its nuclear program. Natanz, buried even deeper and sprawling across a wide area, served as the centerpiece for uranium enrichment. Isfahan, targeted in the same operation, played a crucial role in the nuclear fuel cycle. Together, these sites formed the backbone of Iran's nuclear ambitions, and each was selected for maximum strategic effect. The strikes relied on massive ordnance penetrators, or MOPs, designed for deep bunkers. 14 of these munitions were dropped, targeting reinforced underground structures. Satellite images released after the attack showed collapsed bunkers at Natanz, debris fields, and craters where critical infrastructure once stood. Intelligence assessments indicated that Natanz was completely destroyed, while Fordow and Isfahan suffered significant damage. The destruction extended far below the surface, as President Trump emphasized when he confirmed the strikes, stating, "We have carried out a very successful strike on Iran's 3 nuclear sites. No other military in the world could have done this." Iran's initial response was to downplay the impact, claiming that its uranium stockpile remained secure and that the setback was only temporary. However, US intelligence and independent analysts contradicted these assertions, reporting that not only were centrifuges destroyed, but the stockpile itself suffered heavy losses. While some materials may have survived in secondary storage, the core infrastructure supporting Iran's enrichment program was rendered inoperable. The consequences of the strikes extended beyond the physical damage. The sudden failure of Iran's defense systems undermined public confidence and internal assurances of security. For years, the regime had promised its population that its nuclear assets were safe from foreign attack. The events of that night exposed critical vulnerabilities, forcing Tehran to confront the reality that even its most protected sites could be neutralized. The effectiveness and speed of the operation sent a strategic message, not only to Iran, but to any nation relying on deeply buried facilities for deterrence. President Trump's terse post on Truth Social, "Fordow is gone," encapsulated the intent behind the operation. The strikes were not just a tactical maneuver, they were a calculated effort to reshape the regional balance of power. By crippling Iran's nuclear infrastructure and degrading its missile capabilities, the United States and its allies demonstrated a willingness and capacity to act decisively when red lines are crossed. Iran's leadership responded with public outrage, framing the attack as an act of war and vowing retaliation. The psychological impact was immediate. Confidence in the regime's military assurances was shaken, and the nation's adversaries were put on notice. The fallout was not limited to destroyed facilities. It reverberated through the political and strategic calculus of the entire region. With the dust still settling and the extent of the damage becoming clear, Iran faced a critical decision point. The world watched for signs of how Tehran would respond to the loss of its nuclear assets and the exposure of its vulnerabilities. The next phase would reveal whether Iran would escalate, adapt, or seek new ways to reassert its position. Iran's counterstrike unfolded on multiple fronts, beginning with a series of missile launches and escalating to threats that extended well beyond the Middle East. The first Iranian missile, launched in the early morning hours, was intercepted mid-flight by Israel's Arrow defense system. This initial attempt failed to inflict damage, but Iran quickly escalated its response. Within a 40-minute window, Iranian forces launched a barrage of 15 ballistic missiles targeting Israeli territory. Most were neutralized by Israel's layered air defenses, but several managed to reach civilian neighborhoods, resulting in property damage and light injuries. The psychological effect was immediate. Residents across Israel spent hours in bomb shelters, awaiting confirmation that the threat had passed. This missile campaign, while limited in its physical impact, was intended to demonstrate Iran's capacity and resolve to retaliate despite the blow to its nuclear infrastructure. Tehran's leadership sought to project strength, both to its domestic audience and to adversaries abroad, signaling that the regime retained the ability to strike back. Internally, the attacks helped unify political factions, reinforcing the narrative of resistance at a time of vulnerability. Iran's response was not limited to conventional missiles. In a move that drew immediate international attention, Tehran issued a direct threat to the United States. "We will activate sleeper terror cells in the United States of America." This statement, unprecedented in its clarity, marked a shift toward asymmetric warfare and introduced a new layer of unpredictability. The threat prompted swift action from US security agencies. The Department of Homeland Security raised its terrorism advisory level, citing the credible risk of retaliatory attacks on American soil. Simultaneously, the State Department issued a worldwide travel warning, urging US citizens to exercise heightened caution abroad. These measures reflected the seriousness of the threat and the challenge of countering covert operatives who may already be embedded within the United States. On the economic front, Iran's parliament approved a measure to potentially close the Strait of Hormuz, a strategic choke point through which roughly 20% of the world's oil supply flows. The mere approval of this measure sent oil prices surging by 9% within hours, as markets reacted to the prospect of a significant disruption in global energy supplies. Analysts warned that a full closure could drive prices as high as $120 per barrel, with consequences for economies worldwide. The United States responded by urging China, a major Iranian trading partner, to pressure Tehran against escalating the crisis. Meanwhile, US and allied naval forces repositioned in the region, signaling their readiness to ensure the strait remained open. Throughout this period, cooperation between the United States and Israel remained central. US B-2 bombers were placed on standby, and Israeli officials reiterated their commitment to overwhelming retaliation should Iran's attacks intensify. The two allies coordinated closely, balancing deterrence with readiness for further escalation. For civilians, the reality of the crisis was stark. In Israel, missile sirens and the rush to shelters became routine. In Iran, state media broadcast scenes of parliamentary defiance, aiming to bolster public morale and present a united front. The aftermath of these exchanges underscored the complexity of modern conflict. Iran's missile attacks and threats of sleeper cell activation highlighted the regime's willingness to employ both conventional and unconventional tactics. The potential closure of the Strait of Hormuz added an economic dimension to the crisis, threatening to destabilize global markets. Each move by Tehran was calculated to extract maximum leverage from a position of weakness, while the US and its allies worked to contain the fallout and prepare for further contingencies. But can these covert operatives really threaten US soil? Meanwhile, as the immediate missile threat subsided, a new phase of the conflict emerged, one that would target the very core of Iran's military leadership. Israel's campaign to neutralize Iran's ability to retaliate did not stop with missile defenses or infrastructure. It moved decisively against the upper ranks of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, targeting the architects behind Iran's most sensitive military programs. In a single, coordinated operation, Israeli forces eliminated two high-ranking IRGC commanders: Sahed Issad, the architect of Iran's ballistic missile deployments, and Binan Shajareh, the mastermind behind regional proxy coordination. These were not symbolic targets. Both men played direct roles in shaping Iran's missile strategy and orchestrating the activities of proxy forces across the Middle East. Their removal delivers a critical blow to the IRGC's operational core at a moment when Iran faces immediate external pressure. Sahed Issad's responsibilities included overseeing the deployment, maintenance, and readiness of Iran's ballistic missile arsenal. He was the central figure in ensuring Iran's missile forces could respond rapidly to threats or launch coordinated attacks on regional adversaries. Binan Shajareh, meanwhile, managed the network of proxy militias that extend Iran's influence into Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and beyond. Shajareh's expertise in synchronizing these disparate groups made him indispensable to Iran's regional ambitions. The targeted killing of both commanders is a calculated move, designed to disrupt the IRGC's ability to plan and execute complex operations. The impact of these losses is both immediate and far-reaching. The IRGC's command structure relies heavily on key individuals who possess not only technical knowledge, but also the authority to direct field operations and long-term strategy. With Issad and Shajareh gone, Iran faces a leadership vacuum at the highest levels of its military planning. This absence undermines the IRGC's ability to coordinate retaliatory actions and manage its sprawling network of proxy forces. How might this leadership void affect Iran's network of militias? Without clear direction, these groups may struggle to synchronize their activities or respond effectively to new developments, potentially weakening Iran's deterrent posture and its ability to project power through asymmetric means. In parallel with these targeted assassinations, Israeli forces struck 6 Iranian airfields. These strikes focused on disabling runways and underground shelters, crippling Iran's ability to launch or recover aircraft and restricting the movement of critical assets. By rendering these airfields inoperable, Israel further limited Iran's options for mounting a coordinated military response. The combination of leadership decapitation and operational paralysis represents a strategic effort to degrade Iran's capacity for both immediate retaliation and sustained military action. The broader implications of these actions extend beyond the battlefield. Iran's reliance on proxy groups to retaliate for attacks or project influence has been a defining feature of its regional strategy. With the loss of central command figures, the coherence and effectiveness of these proxy operations come into question. Iraqi-based Shiite militias, for example, have historically targeted US interests in response to perceived provocations, often acting under direct IRGC supervision. Now, with the chain of command disrupted, the risk grows that these groups may act independently or fail to coordinate, increasing the potential for miscalculation and unintended escalation across multiple theaters. The psychological dimension is equally significant. The IRGC has long cultivated an image of invulnerability, projecting strength both domestically and to allied militias. The successful targeting of top commanders undermines this narrative, sending a message to operatives throughout the network that no one is beyond reach. This erosion of perceived security can have a cascading effect, lowering morale and introducing uncertainty at every level of Iran's military and proxy apparatus. Israel's approach is methodical, aiming not only to disrupt Iran's immediate operational capabilities, but also to impose long-term costs on its ability to recover and regroup. By striking at both command and airfield infrastructure, Israel forces Tehran to divert resources to damage control and internal reorganization rather than external aggression. The IRGC now faces the dual challenge of replacing experienced leaders and restoring critical operational assets under the pressure of ongoing external threats. With both command and air bases neutralized, Tehran faces a critical choice: escalate or concede. The consequences of this decision will ripple far beyond Iran's borders, shaping the regional balance of power and exposing vulnerabilities in the systems that underpin global stability. While Iran's leadership absorbs the impact of targeted strikes and its military command faces disruption, another front of the crisis centers on a narrow stretch of water that holds global attention: the Strait of Hormuz. Just 33 kilometers wide, at its narrowest point, this maritime choke point connects the Persian Gulf to the Arabian Sea and serves as the world's most critical artery for oil transport. Every day, nearly 20 million barrels of oil, about 20% of global supply, move through these waters. The strait is equally vital for liquefied natural gas shipments, particularly from Qatar, and for the passage of goods essential to economies across Asia and Europe. The scale and concentration of energy traffic here mean that any disruption, even temporary, threatens to reverberate through global markets. Iran's threat to close the Strait of Hormuz in response to the US airstrikes has already triggered immediate consequences. The announcement alone sent crude prices up 9% in a single day and prompted speculation that a full blockade could drive prices as high as $120 per barrel. The ripple effects would be severe: surging energy costs, supply chain disruptions, and a spike in inflation for both developed and emerging economies. Asia, which relies heavily on Gulf oil, would absorb the initial shock, but the economic fallout would not spare Europe or North America. For industries dependent on predictable energy costs, manufacturing, transportation, agriculture, the prospect of an extended closure represents a direct threat to stability. The leverage Iran holds over the strait is significant, but it comes with inherent risks. Shutting down Hormuz would not only inflict pain on adversaries, but would also undermine Iran's own economic interests. Roughly half of Iran's national budget depends on oil and gas exports. Blocking the strait would cut off its main revenue stream, including sales to China and India. This dual-edged threat raises the question of whether Iran's statements are a negotiating tactic or a genuine intention to escalate. Either way, the market's reaction underscores how seriously the risk is taken. Washington has responded by moving beyond military posturing to direct diplomatic engagement. US officials called on China, Tehran's primary oil customer, to use its influence and urge restraint. China's stake is clear. As one of the world's largest importers of Gulf oil, it faces both economic and political pressure to keep the strait open. Disruption would not only disrupt Beijing's energy security, but would also threaten its industrial base and broader economic growth. The US appeal to China highlights the complex web of interests at play, where rivalries intersect with shared vulnerabilities. Iran's threat to close the strait is not unprecedented, but the current environment is more volatile than in past standoffs. The market's sensitivity is heightened by ongoing inflation and sluggish post-pandemic recovery. Even a partial closure could prompt US and allied naval intervention, raising the risk of direct confrontation. Regional actors like Saudi Arabia, with their own reliance on stable oil exports, watch developments closely and prepare for potential escalation. Russia, another major energy exporter, could seek to capitalize on higher prices or use the crisis to expand its influence, further complicating the diplomatic landscape. The consequences of a blockade would extend well beyond energy prices. Disrupted shipments would drive up costs for everything from raw materials to finished goods. Insurance premiums for tankers would rise sharply, further increasing the cost of every barrel that still manages to leave the Gulf. For businesses and consumers, the effects would be felt in higher prices at the pump, more expensive goods, and broader economic uncertainty. The Strait of Hormuz is more than a geographic feature. It is a linchpin in the machinery of global commerce. Iran's leaders understand the gravity of their threat. Disrupting Hormuz would be economic self-harm for Iran and a potential declaration of war. The world's attention remains fixed on the strait as the next moves by Tehran, Washington, and Beijing will determine whether this crisis deepens or a fragile stability can be restored. The coordinated US and Israeli strikes have reset the Middle East balance. Iran's nuclear infrastructure is crippled, its senior military leadership eliminated, and its ability to project power diminished. These outcomes, confirmed by satellite imagery and the loss of key IRGC commanders, leave Tehran in a position of strategic weakness. Yet, Iran's threats to close the Strait of Hormuz and activate sleeper cells inside the United States underscore the risk of escalation. This operation resets the Middle East balance, and Tehran's next response could define the region's future. What do you think Iran's next move will be? Share your thoughts in the comments below.